And sorry, the session will be recorded. The recording has just started. Please turn off your videos so that our speakers, again, are the only faces that will be shown on the recording. If you have any questions throughout this session, you can chat them directly to me and I'll read them to the speakers. Or you can wait until the end when we open it up for questions from the audience and you can turn on your video, come back into the gallery screen and ask the question yourself. So without further ado, we have a great group of expert panelists today covering the topic surviving and thriving through real estate, investing, buying, and selling during COVID-19. I want to introduce Lisa Blackwell to kick it off. She is a third-generation San Franciscan Bay Area native and a UC Berkeley alumni. She is also a third-generation Bay Area realtor, real estate investor. She's the founder of Lisa Blackwell Properties, a real estate advisory group with a mission to grow with clients focused on wealth and lifestyle real estate as they buy, sell, and invest in their residences, income property, tax shelters, and spaces to develop their businesses. So this is going to be a great dynamic conversation between Jovan, Lisa, and Kevin. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you. Angela, thank you for having us. I'm really excited to be here. And I just want to first of all, welcome everybody, and Kevin and Jovan, thank you so much. I also want to state sort of our purpose for being here, and our purpose is to help everyone get through COVID, of course, and the best way they can with their real estate, but then to also be a resource here at CBE for anyone when they're coming and they want to know about real estate, anything. So that's our overall mission. We just want to be a space for people to be able to come and get the information that they need. So you can reach out to us at any time. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guests. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Kevin, I know very well. His name is Kevin Coleman, and he's an investor and a developer, and he's got a corporate background. And I'm going to let him introduce himself, and then also Jovan. So Kevin, if you would kick off your introduction.
Yep.
Tell us about you.
So quickly, I'm from the Bay Area. Left Intel Capital in 2014 after years of investing in real estate. And the goal was to launch King Development Group, which is an investment company formed with a holistic approach to investing. Our investment thesis is based on Isaiah 61, and it talks about there will be a people who restored a desolate place in the desolate cities that have been ruined for generations. So I was born in a time period in which I saw that devastation, and I just always believed in my heart that I'll be part of the restoration since I was restored in the process. So our mission is simple. We believe that by building generational wealth plus generational impact, we will create communities of opportunity. And we accomplish this by acquiring value-add real estate that provides a great return for our investors, but more importantly for our community. So thank you, CB, for creating this platform and allowing us to have this conversation.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. And Jovan?
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Jovan and Agee, I'm going to reference two ventures that I think are probably most relevant to this audience. One is I started Savvy Consulting, which is my public affairs / government affairs venture, where that's one vehicle that I use to facilitate my passion, which is to really look at how do we help build economic and political power for the Black community in California so that we can thereby achieve the social gains that we desire. Second is founder of Impact California, which is a political action committee that has been created to create a multi-million-dollar war chest to help African Americans and other individuals run for office, be trained, understand how to lobby, to truly make systematic changes that we desire. Prior to that, California kid, grew up in the Central Valley, grew up in West Fresno, one of the poorest zip codes in the country, 93706. After leaving Fresno, spent some time in Los Angeles before finding my way up to Sacramento and kind of stumbling into the political game. I've been doing it for about 17 years this August. And so I consider myself to be a seasoned vet of all things good and bad, of the things we see as the fruit of politics.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. So for our audience here, I just want to start, now that we know kind of who we're talking to, is the first part of our conversation is going to focus on preserving and building wealth and like sort of like the crises that people might be facing in COVID-19, right? So that's going to be the people who are renting and what kind of things that they can maybe do to help themselves, people who are buying and things like that. So I just want to kind of like jump into some of the things people can do to kind of help themselves if they find themselves in an unstable position first. So let's kind of work that. Do you have any, Jovan?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things, and most of my answers will kind of go from a two-pronged approach. So I'll kind of always deal with the individual, but then I'll also kind of speak to the marketplace. And so I think first and foremost, when we talk about, COVID-19, I think we have to talk about what it's done to our economy. I mean, essentially, in 4 or 5 months, we went from an $18 billion budget surplus in the state to a $50 billion deficit. I mean, in 4 months. And the state of California, as we speak, are negotiating a $213 billion state budget, of which about $500 million are being made available for tax credits to provide affordable housing on rental units. The problem is that some of your major buyers of tax credits, Wells Fargo, Citibank, have essentially said that they may not be buying tax credits given the uncertainty in the market. And so what that's going to do, sort of the trickle down of that is that we could see a shortage in terms of what's on the market or what's produced. Some of the advantages of what's happening because of COVID is that if you're a renter, rent relief is a hot topic right now in the California state legislature. Prohibiting landlords from evictions, things of that nature are a hot topic in the legislature because of job loss, job uncertainty, things of that nature. So there's a multiplier effect happening, and depending on where you sit in this conversation, whether you're an owner of an apartment building versus a tenant, it could be good or bad.
Yeah. So for let's start with our renters. So like, what's something that they can do to help themselves?
Yeah, what I would do probably immediately is check in with their city or county government to see what any kind of COVID relief may be possible, whether it's rent subsidies, rent forbearances, things of that nature. If there's any sort of entrepreneurial or philanthropic arm that they're doing, check in with the SBA, Small Business Association. They're providing sort of quote unquote rent relief for small business owners. And as we know, with solopreneurs and things of that such, oftentimes that's your home.
Yeah.
So if you can get relief through the SBA, that's sort of a strategic workaround to also providing some additional revenue to help you cover your mortgage or your rent.
Yeah, and I'll add as an investor, when we look at what's going on right now and what resources out there, I think the first is what Jovan has stated, is that the SBA right now is providing a lot of liquidity into the market. And so I think for us as a community, we always have an apprehension to, interacting with the government. But the reality is it's our capital. It's what we work for. It's what we, through our taxes, what we have rightful ownership to and access to. So I think the first is the fear of the unknown, the fear that has to be kind of moved to the side. Our pride has to be moved to the side, and we have to be able to take advantage of these programs. I know a couple of investors right now that have been able to get the PPP loan, and what people didn't realize is that loan had a forgiveness component to it. And the forgiveness component, it was one for rent, for mortgages, it was one for utilities, it was also one for payroll. But what people fail to realize, particularly for real estate, we may not have a lot of employees, but they put one key piece, which is if you 1099, then you're eligible for forgiveness. Well, the reality is when you're rehabbing a property or you're flipping a property, most of your service providers are not employees, they're 1099.
Mm-hmm.
So the capital that you're seeing in the marketplace or the news where people are getting hundreds of thousands of dollars, up to millions, the reality is it's all forgiven as long as that capital is deployed back into the market. And if you have a project or you have an investment that you've delayed maintenance for a couple of years because of just liquidity challenges, the government is essentially giving you a loan that if you follow the rules of it, it's all forgiven. So I think that's the key piece, is like, let's work smarter, not harder. And more importantly, like, let's leverage what we've paid into and what is rightfully ours to access as well.
Yeah. So a lot of those resources and stuff for our viewers are going to be available in the newsletter that Angela, CBE, is going to send out. So that's going to, you can access some of the information afterwards. Now, so just as we're talking about that, you know, Jovan, you mentioned the how we went from that huge surplus to being quite in debt as a state, as individuals. We've lost a lot of jobs and things like that. So I wanted to talk about how we think, you know, so this is for people going forward, right? But tomorrow, next week, next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road, 5 years, what do we see in the housing market, and what are some smart things we can do today to make sure that we can be best positioned, meaning that either we can take advantage of the crisis that's in a way that is good for us, and that we don't lose anything that we already have.
Yeah, your connection was breaking up for a little bit, so let me repeat what I think I heard you say.
Okay.
So essentially, you asked the question, kind of what resources are out there as it relates to the existing market dynamics, and then what should we be doing today to sort of compound to get us to where we would like to be 3 to 5 years from now? Is that a fair?
Yeah, just thinking, yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
Okay.
just like what, in terms of what's going on with the markets and what we could possibly see based on what's happened in the past, and like the most recent things that have happened in terms of like the unemployment rates have dropped a bit, you know, what the real estate prices have not really dipped in this area much, you know, just so, and then in different trends, what do you see are some of the things going forward? And like you're saying, the resources that are available, you know, how to leverage those.
Yeah, at the end of the day, no matter how dreary the marketplace becomes, people are still going to be making money, and they're still going to be getting rich off of it. And so I think that, you know, looking at our state government first and foremost is the largest funder and financier of affordable housing in the state of California. So if you're looking at venturing into development, even, you know, relatively small scale development, I would definitely turn to, you know, looking at resources in the California State Treasurer's Office. 2 of the divisions there, the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee allocates $600 million a year for tax credit, which is the largest resource that you add to the capital stack when you build affordable housing. And then you couple that with tax-exempt private activity bonds, which are allocated through the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee at just over $4 billion a year. And so those resources have not been cut off. Those resources are still flowing. And, you know, even though our budget has been constricted, $213 billion is a whole lot of money. So then the conversation becomes, once that budget is passed, which we expect for it to be signed by the governor by the end of this month, you should be immediately going to your city and your county and your housing authorities or your housing departments, and then asking them, how is that money finding its way to your community? So it's no different when, you know, folks want to put Donald Trump in crosshairs, and, you know, we want to beat Donald Trump up and say, you know, is this money coming into California? Well, we need to take that same approach with our state and our local electeds and say, okay, the money's come in, how is it getting to my block or my community? So the other half of that is to what can we do? Most individuals don't have the necessary capital to buy vacant lots, to do the type of development that's going to truly make you an instant millionaire, for example, off of one project. But government does. So to Kevin's point, what we don't realize is the largest owner of public land in the state of California are school districts. School districts are sitting on land and doing nothing with it at a time when most of them are having budget shortfalls. So it actually would be advantageous for school districts to do something with that land at a profit, maybe in a co-development relationship. And I'm saying that because these are public entities. So they should be RFPing this land maybe at below market or no cost in order to stimulate local economies, and particularly to people of color, because that's who oftentimes are the students in these school districts.
And I want to add to that point because,
and I'm also wondering. No, go ahead.
No, I want to add to that point because that's a conversation of how do we start to build wealth, right? And you talked it on 3 points, which was historically, currently, and moving forward. And if we look at it historically, just in our generation, in the last 10 years, we went through a great recession. And the numbers that came out of the Great Recession, that by 2013, half of the collective wealth of African Americans was stripped away during the Great Recession, right? Half of the collective wealth. So from the time in which the Great Recession began, from the time in which this research was completed, we saw essentially a generation's worth of hard work and progress was wiped out. So this conversation is timely, and the dots that Jovan is talking through is all about how do we start to accumulate wealth, right? Because we look outside right now, like the conversation that's being had, it's all about equity. It's about equitable participation based on our skill set, based on our creativity, based on our effort and collective work. Ultimately, it comes down to wealth. And our philosophy is this, is that if we control the assets in our community, then we control the outcomes in our community. Ownership is power, right? But more importantly, wealth is a revolutionary act, particularly when they're projecting that our wealth by 2053, I think it is dang near where it was when we just got released out of slavery, right? So if they're projecting and they're casting this vision of where we are to stand in the next 30 years, then we need to cast our own vision. Because I would imagine that whoever is putting that statement out there and that vision out there is probably the same people that have designed the decrease and negative impact to our wealth. So ultimately, we have to first cast our own vision, and it starts with our family. It starts as us as an individual, then it starts with our immediate family, then it moves out to our immediate network, our community, and then collectively as a nation. And so as a nation, as a family, as a community, it goes back to the point of we have paid into this system through our taxes. And so everything Jovan is stating, that it's on us as a community. At the end of the day, we have given enough time for someone to come in and build our wealth for us. At this particular stage where we're at, the conversation is purely about wealth creation. And more importantly, I know that COVID right now is the headlines is one of great job losses, right? It's not only the great job losses that are happening right now, but there's a shaking up happening upon earth. But in that shaking up, people are reimagining what life is like. And for us as a community, and more importantly, as an individual, because when I look at myself, I represent a nation. My kids will have kids, and their kids will have kids' kids. So at the end of the day, very quickly, in 4 or 5 generations, I can have a full tribe that's big enough to fill up a city. So in itself, the actions I take is actually building the wealth of my nation or my kingdom. And the reality of it is the action that we're taking in our wealth, that we're impacting our community, is building up the kingdom of our community. So we have to connect these dots, not only at the individual level, not only at the family level or community level, but back to the point of where we are, where we sit in the state, and be able to hold accountable these elected officials. Hold accountable, not the elected officials that just in DC, but the elected officials in our city, the elected officials that represent our community.
Yeah, to your point about, making sure that our elected officials are held accountable and we have access to those dollars, it's hugely important. So like what we're seeing going on in the market, as you guys know, is and prices are not really going down as people thought they would. And there's also this idea that people are moving away from the city centers. So do you guys see that there is so people are kind of nervous, right? Like they're thinking, is this a time for us to invest? Is this time for us to buy? Is this a time for us to sell? Whether it be commercial property or an investment property, or what is a practical provision, vision that you think people can take, considering the conditions we may have? It's a wild card, no one knows. But if you think about historical perspectives, what kind of practical things you think people can do and make moves that they can make in their investment strategy with property?
Yeah, I'll answer that again, kind of in a two-pronged approach. So I kind of speak to there's the two Californias. So there's the folks that, are $1 million plus. Then there's the folks trying to get to that mark. And so I would say for the $1 million plus folks, this is when they do their damage, right? When the market starts to get constricted, when cash isn't flowing and readily available, this is when hard money lending starts to increase. This is when they start to acquire properties that people may default and they take them over and acquire them at extremely below market. that's a different California than those that are trying to get in the game, right? Or get to that $1 million spot. And so what I would say is that I think that for those south of $1 million still trying to get there in terms of liquid, not, you know, brick and mortar or asset million, but liquid million, that we need to become much more politically astute. And that means no longer can the end game be just registering to vote, right? That's no different than saying, you know, I'm driving a car just because I purchased it. Just because you register to vote, if you don't cast that vote, if you don't actually know the proven track record of the individual you're voting for, if you haven't made it crystal clear in terms of what your expectations are of that individual who you're voting for, then essentially it's no different than trying to shoot a three-pointer with your eyes closed, right? And so I think that our sophistication as a people has to increase, because the number one question most people are going to say, given everything that Kevin has laid out, is how do I change my economic realities given where I'm at? Because it almost seems insurmountable, right? It's almost like getting into a monopoly game where 90% of the board is sold up. And that's almost the reality of what we see. So, but what we fail to realize is that government is sitting on all this land, school districts, cities, counties. You know, Gavin Newsom just RFP'd some of the surplus property that the state had last year through DGS, some of the transit-oriented property. But who's taking inventory of that, right? Is the NAACP? Is it the Urban League? Is it the Black Chambers? Who's taking inventory to actually say who's getting this land? Because what we do know is in most cities, transit-oriented property tends to be your poorest property, or has historically been. We're now seeing the trend reverse. But historically, it's because of air pollution and all these other things, right? But now you're going to see a reverse of that because of the state's focus on wanting to see that property develop. So you're actually going to see a reverse trend of people that historically have not wanted that land trying to get that land, because they're going to get preference points when they apply for tax credits and bonds for that land, right? So again, this is us being astute and saying politics and being politically engaged can't just be voting and then accountability. There's a whole lot of stuff in between, right? And one, it has to be us, to Kevin's point, us looking in the mirror saying, what is our platform? What is our focus as a community? And then does holding someone accountable mean that we're no longer going to give them 4 more years? We're just going to run our own person to run our agenda? But whatever it is, it has to be a very intentional, focused, and specific effort, because we have a very short window of time, in my opinion, where we're looking at 90% of the monopoly board sold up. In about 5 or 10 years, we'll be like 98% with foreign investors, people from out of state, and
no, it's true. So in the last Great Recession, I know that there were a lot of investors that came in, particularly from Australia, and bought up blocks in China and Australia, bought up blocks and blocks of property in neighborhoods that had blight, right? Because the property values went down, but their dollars were up, and they bought up the properties. They bought up all these homes that had been boarded up. They redeveloped them, which brought up the general prices of the neighborhoods. Because if you get rid of like the 3 or 4 homes that are like dilapidated, it brings up the value of the other homes, right? And so it was just like a strategy. And I feel like some of those lessons from then can be taken forward, you know, in terms of the way people do business. And then also when we're talking here about COVID, you're talking about this land that like the schools and different places like that own. Some of the school districts, they imagine, will be shrinking, that there'll be some places I've heard that may do, if we see that people are going to engage in more long distance learning, that land is going to have to be given up. So that's an opportunity for us to like create investment groups and to go in with developers and things like that to leverage those properties. And to your point about being more sophisticated in terms of how things work, and then where, like you said, the land is being held and how it's being distributed is going to be really, really important. This is
and let me say 2 things to that really quick, Lisa. Let me just say 2 quick things to that. One, what you just said in terms of people coming in and buying up land, it's happening right now in Inglewood. I'm working with Inglewood Unified School District to try to figure out how do they ensure they retain the culture of the community because of the new stadium being built, but investors are doing the same thing in Inglewood. Secondly, I would say, to the point about how do you engage districts to get the land, we have to, I think think about our strategy differently. We lead oftentimes as Blacks in our political efforts with social justice, social justice, social justice, not economic justice. So we need to have a full court press where that is the primary talking point. So if someone is running for school board, the primary point has to be economic justice, right? Because the tendency is to say, well, we want to close the achievement gap. Well, guess what's the quickest way to close the achievement gap? Increase the net worth of the household that the child comes from. You'll do that quicker than serving on the school board for 8 years trying to fight a system that even once you're done with your term will probably maybe close the achievement gap by 0.5%. So we have to think differently about these seats we're sitting
It's a good point. It's good.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's like,
Kevin?
we have to add the other components, which is, like I said, the wealth activism and the economic activism. I think they all go hand in hand. There's a need for the protest that we're seeing, and then there's a need that what comes thereafter is that protest has to shift to really where where the needle moves, which is our wealth, right? But I think if I want to answer your question, I want to answer it from a place of my journey, right? I started out in tech. I was at Intel for over 10 years, but along that way, I've always knew that I wanted to prepare for a day in which I did not have to go into work. And I knew at the time that without having a background or inheritance in real estate, I just looked to see where was the most billionaires created. And right now, real estate is third in the sense of, the creation of millionaires. Andrew Carnegie had a statement that he had made. Of course, I like this statement because it was at a time in which the nation was building. And when we look at our nation, we look at our people, and we look at our community, the reality of it is we, at that time, were not able to play the game that they were able to play. They were able to go around the monopoly. I heard it yesterday in a meeting, and it talked about, the amount of times they had to go around the monopoly board before we were even able to play the game, right? So we know that is a reality. However, what we also understand too is the power that we have at our disposal in this day and age is unprecedented. And we look at historically, particularly in the Bay Area, you have a guy named William Landroth, right? Who they don't talk about even in our school districts. Coming up, I didn't find out this man until 5 years ago, but he was essentially the one who had the wealth that established California because he owned a lot of the land here in the Northern California region. And there's a street named after him right in the heart of the financial district, but there's a lack of understanding who he was and what he did. He actually established the first hotel in the Bay Area, Hotel California, right? The capital that he had came because he owned land. And that land, when they found him dead in his home, they found the largest gold reserve at that time in 1848. Now we all know 1849 was the beginning of the gold rush, and that gold rush was on his land. So we have a history, even before, our freedom was given unto us. We have a history of land ownership. Mary Pleasant was in the Bay Area. She created a boarding house, and that boarding house, it housed some of, our governors, state legislators, but this was an African-American woman who took her dollars, who invested her dollars into a boarding house, which today we would call a co-living space, right? So the reality, we have a history of excellence. We have a history of building fortunes in the most tumultuous, challenging times. So if in my DNA runs in my blood a resilient blood, it runs in my blood overcoming blood, then the opportunities we have right now are unprecedented. Our access is unprecedented despite the market cycle. I mean, for us, we've gone through so many cycles that have negatively impacted our community, but yet we still have rise, we still have overcome, and we still have thrived and prospered. So from that lens, I look at it's a mind shift that we have to go through. To your point about the wholesale purchase of our community during the Great Recession, where at that time I was still at Intel. Like I said before, I accessed my 401k, I saved up, and I took the little pennies that I had and I invested at a time when they said real estate was the worst investment to do. And I invested in the area in the city that they said what good can come from Oakland, right? Essentially, it was the stone at the time that the builder had rejected. But for me, I saw greatness in it, always have. I saw greatness because my family was from there. My family migrated there for opportunity and prosperity. My grandfather was able to buy his home and buy properties for his family during a time that you couldn't walk into a bank, at a time where you couldn't move to where you want to move to. So my thing is, if he was able to do these things during his lifetime, how much more can I accomplish in my lifetime? But it started with my mindset. I knew at the time I couldn't trade my time, my most precious commodity, which is my time. I don't get that back. I can lose $1, I'll gain $1. But once I lose that time, I don't get it back. And at the end of the day, I don't have the stop clock to know how much time I have on earth. That's outside of my hands. So with the time I do have, I had to have a shift in my mentality. I can't trade my time for money.
Yeah.
If I trade my time for money, that at the end of the best I can do is find a high paying job, right? That makes the most amount of money per hour. But the reality of it is I want to make money when I'm sleeping. So as a young man, when I first started out at Intel, I looked at my dollars as my greatest workers. I said, this dollar right here is not going to call in sick, right? If there's a party on Friday night and that dollar supposed to be at work on Saturday, it's not going to call in Saturday morning and tell me that it got a headache, even though really it's a hangover, right? That dollar's going to work 24 hours, never call in sick. So for us, we got to look at our money from a different lens. Because the reality of it is our purchasing power puts us at the 15th. We'll be the 15th richest nation if we took our $1 trillion purchase power and looked at it as a purchasing power, right?
Yeah.
That's a mindset shift, right? So for us I think that's where it first starts out. It's like, how do I not trade my time for money, but how do I trade my money to go out and get additional assets, right?
Yeah.
Come back and get additional friends. And with those additional friends, those friends can now be deployed to our community, and we become the restorers. We become the ones that are doing the very thing that we're looking outside for our community to be done. So at the end of the day, we have to look at things through, I call it a roots and wings, right? At the end of the day, you know, if you look out over the years, especially as it pertains to your money, roots are your long-term investments, right? They're your real estate, they're your retirement, your investment accounts, and in some cases, it's a business that you own. But roots grow slowly over time. They require regular watering, they require fertilization, they require weeding. There's some tending that you have to do, right? But the reality is, strong and long-term roots are key to your net worth. It's a long-term game, right? They grow value over time, right? But handled wisely, they provide security, they provide freedom, right? And the reality is, your roots is what actually holds down your tree. So if you look at roots, that's your network, that's the anchoring, right? But the reality is, the wings, that's your income, that's the cash saving, that's your credit. How high you fly depends on how much you earn and save, right? It's not how much you earn, it's how much you earn and save, right? And how you also manage your credit. Let's add that other component, because to Jovan's point, Jovan's talking about billions of dollars, right? That's trickling through our system. We got to be able to play the game, and from a credit perspective, have access and leverage that credit to build our wealth, right? So at the end of the day, like, when you use it wisely, your wings not only fund your daily living, but it also grows your roots. So for me, I saw the wonderful thing about real estate investing is that it gave both. It gave me financial roots, but it also gave me wings. When I'm sleeping at night and my tenant is staying in one of my buildings, right? I know at night when I'm sleeping, if I factor in what they're paying per month, every minute, that's something being added to my net worth. That's wings being added. And then to my net worth, the building is appreciating over a long haul. So we have to ask ourselves, if we're technologists, if we're in the healthcare industry, if we're in education, we're in government, at the end of the day, no matter what industry we're in, if this nation is sane, and particularly right now, and we'll see what happens come November, at the highest level of this nation, it's someone whose father built his wealth in real estate, and it's real questionable about what he did with that net worth. But the reality is, his father built a net worth in real estate, and now the president of this nation comes from a background in real estate. So all the moves that he's been making, even if you have no experience in real estate, look at him through the lens of real estate. And why is he changing the tax law to benefit people who own real estate? Why is he putting liquidity into the system to benefit? Why did he add the 1099? Because real estate people only do 1099s. So the reality is we have to play the game based on the nation that we live, even if we are in venture, even if we are in education, even if we are in the arts, right? The reality is microaggression, code switching, man, that stuff wear you down. And at the end of the day, you want to be at a place in your life to where I'm here because I want to be here. I'm here away from my family, my kids, because this is where I choose to be rather than I'm forced to be.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And then, so I just wanted to talk about, like, you mentioned the wings and the roots. My grandmother had an interesting philosophy about investing, and we used to drive by her properties, and she called them her R&R. And so I think it was the old military term, I'm not sure, but she would call it her retirement and relaxation. And so she had the houses that we would go by, and she was like, oh, no, that's my retirement house. And so when she got ready to retire, she sold one of the houses, and that was her retirement money. And then, I mean, we had to put her, you know, she had healthcare issues, so we used it for that. But, and then her recreation money, that's the money we would take from the houses, and we would go have fun. But she was a postal worker at night. And then, I mean, at night she worked the graveyard shift, and then she was a realtor during the day. So that was, so I would say that it was, that she had the same philosophy that you did. And then when you were talking just a moment ago about, you know, different ways to invest and stuff like that. So I have a lot of my clients are interested in building wealth through real estate. And what they've been doing is they have like goals, like they want to buy 10 houses each, right? Or like if they're a couple, they can buy 20 houses, or if they qualify, or if they're a single person, they just want a single home, 10 homes, because that's the amount of loans you can get under Fannie Mae, the conforming loans, the conventional loans. With things shifting in terms of where people want real estate, do you still think that that is a viable option for building wings? And if so, like what areas would you think that is a good idea? Or was that something that you would employ, or would you stick with multifamily?
So I'll address it. I'll address it in three ways in which we're currently vertically integrated to investing in, right? But I want to first start off by saying, when I talk about real estate investing, you know, when you're living in your home, it's a hope that over time, now of course, historical perspective has shown us that over time, real estate appreciates. But when you're buying a home, you know, I think the greatest thing that it provides is the tax breaks, right? But in terms of investing, what I'm talking about buying cash flowing rental property that puts more money into your pocket, right, than what the expense is to carry that property, right? This is the type of investment that provides the income, and this is a stable long-term environment that grows in value over time, which is the roots. So I want to be very clear in that, right? We're talking about cash flowing producing investment. Now, to answer your particular question, I think what always helps us out, right, is like, you know, we know that we first have to know where we've come from in order to know where we're going, right? There's a power in our history, and there's a power in that story. I'm not going to go way far back. I'm just going to take 09, right? In 09, across this whole earth, it was one of, at the bottom of the stock market when it reached 6,800, everyone said real estate causes crash, values had plummeted. It is the worst investment to make, is what they were saying. And I'm sitting there saying, wait, a home in Oakland right now is selling for $40,000, $50,000. Like, it's cars out here on the lot that are worth more. And I'm looking at the rent at the time was still very strong. So the dynamics of that recession is starkly different than what we're experiencing in COVID. I'm gonna tell you right now, no one has a crystal ball, but what I do know is this fact. We just entered, prior to COVID hitting us, and now we're officially in a recession, we were in the greatest bull run our nation has ever experienced. I don't give a care if it doesn't rain for 20 straight years. At some point, the rain is going to come. But what I learned in the Great Recession is this: I don't care if the market's going up. I don't care if the market's going down. There is always opportunity. The key is figuring out, how do you solve problems? Because like I said from the beginning, we are a value-added real estate firm, meaning we have to add value in order for us to create equity, wealth, as well as profit for our investors. So we have to solve problems, or we have to be able to look uniquely at a situation where everyone sees is hopeless and see value in it. So right now, what are a couple of things that are happening? Post-COVID, Twitter made the big announcement. Essentially saw productivity numbers were not only strong, not only stable, but strong. Now, of course, everyone is fearful of their job, so they're going to work even more harder. But I think we've always known, who've ever worked from home, that the reality is we probably worked more hours at home than we did in the office because of all the distractions. So Twitter made the big announcement that, listen, if you want to come back into the office or not, that's up to you. Then, of course, Jack Dorsey was the CEO of Square, so the same announcement came out of Square. I think it's going to be a domino effect. I think prior to COVID hitting us, we were in a housing crisis, right? And I always tell people that, yes, we're in a housing crisis, but we also were in a crisis of identity. Because the reality is, while everyone was looking at the $1.5 million home in San Francisco, they were missing out in their own community, the community that looks like them. The homes was traded for $300,000. So to me, I don't think it was a housing crisis. I think it was an identity crisis. We didn't see value in our community until someone comes in and does the very thing that we can do, which is improve our property, sit on our school board, hold our counselor accountable, join an association, and guess what? Y'all become a mob at that point, and y'all pushing a hard line. So to me, it's about, yes, right now, the future is a crystal ball. Rates right now are at the all-time historic lows. Liquidity it's always been a challenge, because after the Great Recession, it was much more challenging in order to get access to that capital. But having historically low interest rates, right? Having a shift in the Bay Area. We know the reason why our housing was red hot is because of the tech industry. Well, best believe post-COVID, we already were seeing liquidity dry up for a lot of the ventures, which then has a ripple effect, right? If liquidity is drying up, where more venture dollars are flowing to mature companies, well, the startups who are actually hiring and growing, that stalls that out. And if it stalls out hiring and growing, then that eventually impacts the housing market, right? So we know that to be the case, that the external markets right now, there's a lot of risk out there, right? Particularly when you talk about the Bay Area. However, once again, if we can look to solve problems, we will create opportunities no matter the cycle. So where would I start with? Well, right now we're in contract for a property that right when COVID hit, every year the county sells tax default properties, right? Every year, once a year, properties get put up because why? Not because the people couldn't make their mortgage payment, because if that was the case, usually the banks will step in and pay the mortgage, because why? Taxes have a precedence above a mortgage. So government city can sell your asset independent if you have a mortgage on it. So usually banks will pay the taxes to avoid the sale of the property. So what properties end up getting sold? They're properties in our community. Our elders who bought those properties in the 60s and 70s, right, weathered all types of storms. I'm talking about the economic war that was waged against that generation, that then led to the biological war, that then led to the war to stop the biological war that they started, right? Then the mass incarceration, right? That generation weathered all them storms only to what? Lose their asset because they didn't pay taxes. So I would first start with say, I don't care if you're from the Bay Area, if you're from Alabama or Detroit, talk to everyone in your family. Right now we on Zoom calls. We having Zoom parties. We having Zoom family reunions. Someone on that Zoom family reunion stop and say, listen, is there anyone on this call right now that is having trouble paying their taxes? Okay.
Yeah.
Talk to me off the phone. You may not want to talk about it amongst all the family members, but we got to move our pride to the side. Like, because at the end of the day, this property that we're in contract for right now, right? This was an elder who we first said, hey, is there someone in your family that can help assist you? I have no family. He's in a retirement age, 74 years old. And essentially what we're stepping up to do is we become now a social worker for him. So our team right now is engaging with Fam First Foundation, which, I want to pause right there. This is where it comes back to, what is the return on community? Yes, the asset we're getting, because it needs a lot of maintenance, right? Been deferred for over 20, 30 years. So we're going to make money just based on the fact of rehabbing that property. But the other return is you bring in community partners like Fam First that start to provide them food. Why? This man didn't even have anyone to bring him food. So at the end of the day, he's in this home suffering because of some health issues he was having. Now he's plugged into community. Now community is coming, dropping off food. Secondly, they're helping assist finding a permanent place for him. Now, because of COVID, it's been challenging. And what I've discovered is that there's a lack of companies that are connecting the dots for our elders who have this wealth that they have earned, right?
Yeah.
And if we didn't step in, that property would have got sold in the tax sale for about $170,000, right? Because everyone was distracted because COVID had just hit. In the city of Oakland, if we didn't know who ran the tax department, if we didn't know any of them, they would have sold this man asset 2 weeks into shelter in play. So I asked the director, I said, listen, this is the elder in our community. At the end of the day, he has over $200,000 of equity that will allow for him to enjoy the rest of his life peacefully, that he's earned. Why are you guys selling this man property in the midst of a pandemic? This person has a purchaser who's ready to step in. This property needed to be moved to the side. Now, luckily, because of the points that Jovan is making, we very much understand, because we own assets in this community, We know who our counselor is. We know
Yeah.
who our treasurer is. We know who's working under our treasurer. So we can quickly put a call in, because here's the thing is what they don't want. They, as you can see right now, all these companies put up their Black Lives Matters posts. They don't want that phone. Like the bag's out, the bag's out, right? When our community comes together intentionally, as Jovan is stating, they don't want them problems. So we just have to be intentional, but more importantly, we need practitioners that are sensitive to our community needs, right? At the end of the day, the company that was present, that he was willing to give his property away to this company, it was one of our white brothers, right? And when we asked him, we said, you can see his condition. So you felt it was comfortable to give this man pennies when you can see clearly that he needs help. And for them, it's like, oh, well, he just wanted to give it to me. Of course he do, he needs help. So the reality is this is our situation. So no matter where the market cycle is, our community, our elders are transforming this wealth outside of our community, right? And traditionally, yes, in the Great Recession, if it was my one offer, there was 9 Chinese investors who also had an offer on that property.
Yeah.
And I'm looking around like, where's our community at? Where's not, okay, it wasn't even, we say the Caucasian community, it was literally in 09, 010, 11. It was hard to get people to see the value invested in Oakland at that time when properties are $70,000, $80,000. Now, of course, capital was a concern. But if we think in group economics perspective, we got to start thinking out of our individual and say, how can I become resourceful? I got a 401k. They allow me to take a loan out against my 401k that I pay my own self an interest rate back to my own self. Well, at that time, the stock market was crashing. So I pulled max up out my 401k that I put into for 10 years and said, I'd rather bet on my own self. And more importantly, I'd rather bet on the restoration of my community.
Yeah. Now, so speaking to that point in terms of how people can come together and make investments. Now, like there's different ways to do that, right? So some of them are investing in development groups themselves or funds, and also coming together as groups to invest in projects. Do you have any input on that, Kevin or Jovan?
I definitely, I will share real quickly. So I think one of the first things is that we have to first see the talent in our community, right? And so because of my experience in venture investing for a number of years, I had a chance to see a lot of the companies that have become conglomerates started out very, very early stage with maybe 4 or 5 employees, and they came to Intel Capital seeking capital. So for me, I said, well, listen, the most overlooked resource in this earth is our community. And I choose not to be one of those people. So I have seen one of the most innovative companies, I believe, in the development space is a company called Urban Farmers. So for us, we deployed capital as well as our intellect as well. So not only physical capital, but also our experience and my background in venture development. We partner alongside Urban Farmers, and there, I believe it's the most innovative model, but it was a very straightforward one, which is if traditionally development occurs in our community, they give bare minimum when it comes to meeting community needs, right? Like they scratch the bare minimum box, right? Which is like, what's the least amount of affordable housing I can give to pacify this whole community, right? They were one of the early innovators that said, listen, if I partner alongside some of the largest landowners in our community, which is the church, I can actually grow their wealth as my partner, right?
Yeah.
Now it's genius because essentially they have the asset, and traditionally these developers will come in and turn the people who actually have the gold into small fee-based, not even owners, just getting a small component of an asset that they had owned only because why? My people perished because of lack of knowledge. They didn't understand how to take that raw land and go through the entitlement process. So Urban Farmers had an innovative approach, which was, I'm just not going to screw my community. I'll rather go and partner with them. I'd rather partner with them, take them, walk them through the process, right? Grow their wealth. Now as a church, instead of building, a 20, 40,000 square feet church when your community is leaving up out, right?
Yeah.
Your community is being incarcerated. Your community is suffering from educational health. Now you have a physical asset. You have an apartment complex that generates revenue. Now that revenue is now creating health centers in Hollandale Beach. It's creating educational centers. And this is a model that now is being deployed here in the Bay Area. So specifically, that is one ways in which, from a development perspective, we can
May I ask
not
you a
only.
question? Yeah, just from from a person who may want to invest in something like that, how do your returns on your development model compare to the regular just buy it, strip it, and sell it model?
I mean, that's a much deep conversation, and definitely, we're, like you said from the beginning of the conversation, is that we're here as a resource. But I'll address it high level. There's what you call a preferred return. So traditionally, as a capital investor, when you invest capital into a deal, you get what's called preferred return. That says essentially before any capital is deployed to the sponsor, which would be the developer, that we're getting somewhere between 8% interest. Now ask yourself this question: we've seen the stock market go through probably its greatest bull run as well. But the reason why real estate has created the most millionaires, because in times of economic uncertainty, in times of economic contraction, people want to take their capital and put it to physical hard assets. So when you're getting 8% at a time when I think right now they're allowing, I think the market rates for CDs are like 0.2, right?
Yeah.
And if you get a CD over 5-6 years, you're getting what? Maybe 1-2%. So 8% is an 8x return compared to market average, right? Now, of course, like I said, historically, the stock market has gotten 10%. But I would say for a development deal, traditionally it's around 8% preferred return plus some type of equity split. And the equity split, of course, is based on the trajectory of return. So risk reward spectrum always guides what type of return an investor would get. And now more specifically, from a state legislation perspective, development has got one of the most advantageous tax break that has been created during the Jobs Act in 2017, which was the opportunity zone. And so basically what that legislation was, our community, essentially inner city, rural, have been green lighted for capital investing. Why? If you invest your capital gains over a long period of time, and if you invested over, well, you can't do 7 years because that's now done. But if you invest over 5 years, you get a step up in your basis when you get ready to pay your capital gains. But if you hold that investment beyond 10 years, every gain that you receive post-acquisition, so when you deploy your capital gains into an opportunity zone fund, after 10 years, you're going to pay your capital gains on the original gain in 2026. But if you let it sit there and you let it grow past this cycle into the recovery, and say, for instance, you invested $1 million of capital gains, in 2026, you pay a little bit of the capital gains for that, for what you've earned previously. But if that million grows over 10 years, another million, well, guess what? That whole $1 million is written off tax-free, no capital gains. So to answer your question regarding how people can deploy capital into development, opportunity zones is one of the greatest tax breaks given to capital gain investors, right? Secondly, the second best would be coming together collectively and being able to deploy capital into a deal.
Yeah, and that deal can be in the opportunity zone.
Correct. And this is why Jovan's here as well, is because we have to be able to connect these dots, right? Yeah. These legislations that are happening are impacting our community real time. So if someone's going to restore a property and opportunity zone, shouldn't it be the very people that went through the wartime that actually saw their community decimated? Wouldn't they be the first people that you will come and work with in order to restore that community? So that's where these dots have to be connected, because if not, other people outside our community understand the legislation, and they're going to restore a community not based on what the community needs, but based on how they see fit.
I just want to interject real here, and Jovan, you can take over. I just want to make sure everyone who's joined is aware that we're coming to an end. If you have questions that you want to ask the panelists, you can either turn on your camera and I'll unmute you, or you can chat me a question. And so we'll stay for another 10 minutes or so. Thanks.
Yeah, we're just going to add, I think, everything that has been sort of referenced by Kevin or myself, it really what we're talking about is re-educating that needs to happen of our community. And that was really the basis from which I created Impact California, this political action committee, because a lot of our
how do people find it?
They go to www.impactcalifornia, so it's IMPACCALIFORNIA.org. But it's to And it's not to try to overshadow or negate any of our historical institutions like the NAACP, the Black Chambers, the Urban Leagues, or even the Black Lives Matter movement, but really it's to fill the voids that are out there. And I think they're basic things like, one, it's the education. A lot of it is vocabulary, right? So much of the stuff is just basically, because every industry has a vocabulary, right? If you want to become a lawyer, there's certain terms you use. Medicine, there's vocabulary. And so real estate, a lot of the things that, Kevin is talking about, people are talking about preferred returns. I'm just like, this stuff is going past them. And, they hear 8%, they don't know what that's in reference to, where that's excellent because to put it in contrast, CalPERS, for those who may be state workers and your retirement is going to CalPERS, they basically give on their portfolio 7%, right? So if you're talking about 8% plus equity, I mean, when Kevin talks about he pulled money out of his 401k to invest in himself, that's what that means. And why? Because your gamble is a quicker return and for more, right? So I just think that, when you look at Impact California, it was really constituted because, one, we need a repository, right? So it can't be, if someone finds out about a Zoom call or if someone knows a Lisa or a Kevin or a Jovan, right? No, this has to be something that can be accessed somewhere, right? On a website. There are regional trainings that occur. We got to go back to school again on basic things. And again, I'm not disparaging any things that our institutions have created for us, but the public education system in this country was designed to create workers, not rich people. They're designed to create workers for rich people.
For rich people.
So, at best, if we close the achievement gap and tomorrow all African Americans graduate with straight A's, you still don't have the tools you need to be wealthy or to do the stuff we're talking about. So again, we have to get our priorities straight and focus on what we're really focusing on, because if we're honest, many of the people in our communities who have attained wealth over the past 10, 15 years in sports and entertainment don't have degrees from Ivy League universities. Some don't even have college degrees, and some don't even have high school diplomas, right? And so I think, and I'm not disparaging the need to go get a good education. Don't mischaracterize what I'm trying to say.
No,
But what I am saying is that once you have money, you can be self-determinant. And look at what Nipsey was doing. That to me is the most recent example we have on large scale of community development of what Kevin is talking about, which is we are our own economy. We create our own market. No one was looking at the Crenshaw district in the part of Crenshaw he was developing in. And so, but that shows you when one person walks out on faith and believes in their own brand enough, the sort of ripple effects you can create in the sort of market pressures to get other people to jump on board and believe in what you're doing and how that changes an environment.
Yes, correct.
We have a question from the audience that I'd like to read through. So can you guys talk a little bit about the specific steps non-owners looking to buy should be taking right now? Should COVID-19 make us more aggressive in buying now versus later? Can you talk a little bit more about that piece?
I'll let Lisa as an agent can probably talk through
some of the steps. So Kevin mentioned earlier that one of the wonderful things that's happening right now is that interest rates are really low. Some of the challenges with that are access, capital and stuff like that. But if you're a first-time homeowner, there are a lot of resources for you. But one of the first things I would focus on is making sure that you're liquid and that your credit is good. You can also come together with other people and buy property, right? So you don't always have to do it on your own. You can do it with your family members. You can do it with people at your workforce and things like that to buy. And you also need to think about, is this, your personal residence, or are you going to buy a building or a block? Like what is it that you're looking to buy? If you're just looking to buy your single family home, you can even do that with other people. I'd also say that, people have been a little bit afraid of the the Airbnb model because of what happened with COVID and stuff like that. But I'm gonna say that to look at that a little bit more carefully, in part because people are starting to come back into renting spaces. And then also there's been, I think we have like 180 days plus another 180 days. We're looking at almost a year to 2 years of maybe not being able to pay your mortgage even if you have one. I think and Jovan, you might know about this in more detail. I think California is looking at enacting another 180 days after the COVID crisis is lifted of making it so that you can't, right, forgiving people's loans and stuff like that. So I don't want, so don't be afraid, and you can be a little bit creative as well. But so I would say the first thing you want to look at is your cash and your credit. And then if you still feel like there's a gap there for whatever product that you want to buy, think about coming together with other people and create an investment group.
Yeah, and if I can piggyback on that answer, because I think if I look at when I first started out, right, I started from scratch, right, in the sense of, I think Bigger Pockets was it was not around when I started. And if I were to start today, real estate it's not rocket science. And I think what's key is getting your foundation strong. And Bigger Pockets is probably one of the greatest resources that I can't even believe has been given out, right? Because when I started, you had to pick the pieces and try to put the puzzle together. Bigger Pockets is a trusted resource. I would start there. Secondly, to Lisa's point, I would look at what resources I have access to. It may not be my bank account. It might be through my credit. So your greatest investor is Fannie and Freddie. If they're only asking for 3% of their money, outside of Fannie and Freddie, it's hard to find somebody willing to give you the capital that you need at 3%. But I also want to talk about a person who's starting out. I started out buying residential, moved to apartment complex. And one of the things that we're looking into now, we partner with another innovative company from our community called Elevate, and they have mastered commercial. And I really challenge people starting out to look beyond the Bay Area, look beyond this region, because when you look at America's best places to live, there are places that you wouldn't even think about: Boise, Idaho, Columbus, South Carolina, in Alabama. You start to understand the industries that are being driven that's causing a population increase and that's causing the economy to grow. And I would say, and I would challenge, we're looking at right now in Columbus, South Carolina, there was a 54-unit apartment complex full of 2 bedrooms, 1 bath. Now, that apartment complex generates, the numbers were $48,000 a month. Now, in South Carolina, operating expenses around 36%, so around 32, 36%. So essentially about $20,000 of that is going to operating expenses. And that's with a property manager, right? We're talking about passive investing. Now you're down to $28,000, right? Now the property was worth 1.7, which required about $400,000 down. Now, after $400,000 down, you have a mortgage of $6,000. So you're talking about essentially, you're getting $22,000 a month on a property that's in a strong economy. What's going on in South Carolina, Columbus? They're driving the autonomous car industry. So BMW and all these automobile manufacturers are settling upon South Carolina. Why? Because they incentivize the auto industry. So I would first look at the local economy. You may be from Detroit or Ohio. Find out what's driving the local economy. Where are companies moving to? Right now, industrial is big. Elevate is, it's led by an African-American gentleman in a space where there's a lack of African-Americans playing in that space. So I think for us, know that greatness is in us and there is no limit. Because when he said all things are possible, that was truth. Limits are a lie. So if you're starting out building your knowledge base, I would go to Bigger Pockets and I would remove any limitations, because if they were able to build wealth in the 1800s and early 1900s, we can do even far greater. So, I challenge you, yes, residential for us, particularly in Oakland, we're shifting, we're selling our assets here in the Bay Area and looking out of state. We're looking at industrial, looking at a mobile home. We're looking at apartment complexes. The reason why the Bay Area, if you have rental property, I think if you're going to have a rental property in the Bay Area, you really want to partner with the government and solve some of their challenges that ultimately the government is not equipped to solve. Senior care housing. This morning, we have 2 vacant units. The city, when the stimulus bill was created, a lot of the money went to senior housing and veteran housing. So if you're looking to get into renting and you're actually with a risk score, I would avoid, I would not fight the current if you're going to invest in the Bay Area. And I would partner and solve community problems and community challenge. Elderly and veterans is a challenge that we can solve.
So I guess this is the last question to that point. What resources should we look to get a list of land to purchase? Any ideas there?
Or
I think he
open,
knows.
and where? Yeah, Jovan had some.
Yeah, I would just say generally
For the
speaking,
government. She's talking about where the government has the land, or.
I think just generally.
Yeah, I'm always a big fan of, you know, to Kev's earlier point about making that machine called government give us back our fair share. So we have cities, counties, school districts, the state, water districts, all these special districts. You know, we have over 4,400 special districts in the state of California, over 1,100 school districts, 58 counties. Hit them all up, and you'll be surprised about how many African Americans we actually have in leadership positions in the state, places like Paris, California, Fontana, California. So I would just highly encourage you to contact, you know, people in that area, even if it's just a staff person in the city manager's office, and ask them for a list of their surplus property.
And I would say, as an investor, as a private investor, we have to think creatively and resourcefully, which is in our DNA. So the investment that we're in Oakland, we have to look at land use. So there's a property on a 6,000 square foot lot. Now, for most traditional housing in California, they sit on maybe a 3,000 square foot lot, small backyard. So what we're doing is actually creating value by splitting the lot. This property sits around the corner from Highland Hospital. So as soon as COVID subsides, we're approaching the hospital to solve a need that they had before COVID, which is housing for their nurses, as well as housings for their outpatients. So if to answer your question regarding where would one look for land, I would say look under stones that investors are not looking in. Look in areas that people have overlooked, which is if a property sits on a large lot, what is the zoning for that lot? And how someone can look at zoning is utilizing the city. City has maps that you can put the zoning on top of, and then start to research what does that zoning mean? Because here's one thing I want to share. The state of California has been addressing the housing crisis over the last 2 years, putting some of the most robust development-friendly legislations that have passed. What that means is, if we were in an environment of not in my backyard, them days are over with. We are in a crisis, and they have passed legislation that when you look at land, you have to now look at it in a totally new lens, because there's value right before your very own eyes.
Well, thank you guys. This has been a very timely and inspirational conversation. This is really great. A lot of folks have been asking about the resources that you all talked about. And so for everyone's benefit, we'll be assembling all the resources that they talked about. We'll give it to you guys. Everyone who's registered, they'll receive it. And then we'll also have it in our newsletter. And we'll also have it on our website. And then we'll also have this recording available. So hopefully between those options, you'll be able to get access to all the great information that they shared with us today. So thank you again. This is, as I mentioned, a part of CBE's virtual chat series on resiliency through COVID. A huge round of applause if everyone could give it to our panelists. Thank you all. This was such an amazing and inspirational conversation. And with that, we will call it for the day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela.
Thanks.
Thank you, CBE.
Thanks, Angela. Thanks, CB. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.